As I told you, we have an agenda. I plan to give highlights about basic on safeguards for non-nuclear weapon states. As you know, safeguards is the key of the non-proliferation system because it's the verification, the compliance that the non-proliferation, that all activities are and materials are under peaceful uses. We will talk a little about safeguard, the IAEA safeguard system, the status of Latin America and Caribbean safeguard, how are the states concerning their safeguard commitments. Then we will go to understand the Argentina and Brazil nuclear verification system, its uniqueness, how is the cooperation between ABACC and IAEA, ABACC today and some accomplishment. If we have some time, we could discuss further what does it mean about verification as replacement of additional protocols, given that both countries, Brazil and Argentina, haven't signed the additional protocol. And everyone knows that ABACC has been proposed as a kind of inspiration for other regions with conflict because it has been a successful model. We have studied that and we can give you some information about this. So let's go to the commitments under NPT. You know, at the Article 2 and 3, we won't read all this, but it's important to know that under the NPT, non-nuclear weapon states have to conclude with the IAEA Comprehensive Safeguard Agreement. What does it mean? We will see in just 1 minute. On the other, what we talk is that with a full scope safeguard or comprehensive safeguard agreement is that those verifications should cover all source and special fissionable material, uranium, plutonium, etc., to prevent diversion to non-peaceful purposes, but always without eroding or hampering the right of peaceful uses that are consigned in Article 4. And also establish a time period to conclude this safeguard agreement with IAEA. And there is no exception. Any non-nuclear weapon state should sign an agreement with IAEA, even though they have little or no nuclear material and facilities. On the other hand, each state should not or must not export to non-nuclear weapon states except under IAEA safeguard. What these materials, source or special fissionable materials, I am using the vocabulary that are consigned in the treaty and in the safeguard uses, common uses, and also equipment that could be used for any non-peaceful use. Concerning the commitment relating to Treaty of Tlatelolco, all states parties, besides the commitment about useful or exclusively apply nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, also set what is called a control system based on IAEA safeguard to verify compliance of commitments. Specifically, Article 13 of the Tlatelolco Treaty talks about IAEA safeguards over all nuclear activities, translating the comprehensive safeguard agreement with IAEA, and also set some kind of period to conclude negotiation, and no exception for state parties with little or non-nuclear material or facilities. Let's go to the IAEA safeguard system. For non-nuclear weapon states, we have for IAEA another system, voluntary system for nuclear weapon states under the NPT are for non-NPT states, but it's not the case. I'm giving you here a reference that is the safeguard glossary that's very useful because you have there all the definitions concerning safeguards in all the way possible. You have several elements that are the keys of the IAEA safeguard system for non-nuclear weapon states. The Comprehensive Safeguard Agreement, date 1971, just after the NPT entry into force, and is designed to verify the correctness and completeness of a state's declaration to ensure no diversion of declared nuclear material to nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. Then you have another milestone, the additional protocol that was approved in 1997, because the Comprehensive Safeguard Agreement just wasn't enough for the international community to discover or to disclose undeclared materials and activities, and it happened after experience in Iraq and North Korea, etc. Then you have, for those countries that have little or no nuclear activities, the small quantities protocols to the CSA, dates 1974, and it gives some kind of relax because it's not the same kind of verification. It's so deep. Then you have the modern approaches to safeguard, that the concept that IAEA pushes at the present time is the state level approach. Is of the 2020 years, and is designed to prioritize relevant conditions, not only go further materials and facilities and analyze the whole situation of states. And there is another important concept, that is integrated safeguard, that is at the same time, that combines the Comprehensive Safeguard Agreement with additional protocol and even the state level approach. And with all this, IAEA gives some kind of relax to a very thorough inspection in the countries once the IAEA has drawn the conclusion that there is an absence of the declared nuclear materials and activities. These are what you see here are the key elements of the IAEA safeguard system. What is a comprehensive safeguard agreement? It's an international agreement concluded between a state or a group of states with IAEA. There is a document that rules how is this CSA, the INCIRC 153 modified. This document specifically provides guidance on the structure and content of the Comprehensive Safeguard Agreement, and is the basis of the NPT and the Local Treaty safeguards. And what does this document say? Well, it says that the purpose of comprehensive safeguard is to ensure that safeguards are applied in accordance to the term of the agreement, that all the material is in peaceful activities within the territory and the jurisdiction of the state, and that the material is not diverted to nuclear weapons and other kind of explosive devices. Requires, and this is important, so I highlight this, a state system of accounting and control, that is a key, There are reporting by the states, and agency can access to carry out design information verification activities to design how to verify and concrete inspections. The global status is that today 183 states have signed CSAs with the IAEA. And here I recommend you to follow this, this document that is called Safeguard Implementation Report. You have an extract of the key points in this link that I will provide you the presentation, of course. And you see there how IAEA has handled for the year, the past year, all the safeguard activities. What is an additional protocol? Is to enhance the CSA. Particularly, there is a model, a standard model that is reflected in the INCIRC 540. The most important thing is of the additional protocol that several states are reluctant to accept is that on the first, I must say that IAEA emphasized that without additional protocol, the agency is unable to provide credible assurance of the absence of undeclared nuclear material and activities. That is very important. And well, what the particularity of the additional protocol now is that the additional protocol permits what is called complementary access, for which IAEA might request access to undeclared location. Remember that states have to declare all their activities and locations and materials, but could happen that IAEA want to see or to inspect any other location, as if the state sign an additional protocol should permit that the so-called complementary access to conduct verification activities such as environmental sampling. So the global status is that 131 states has right now CSAs and additional protocol according to the same document I mentioned before. The small quantities protocol is another document and another rules for countries with this condition. Nuclear material not exceeds 1 kilogram, or non-nuclear facilities and existent on plan. And right now, 103 states has signed with IAEA small quantity protocols. The state level approach is a modern approach that not place the attention only upon materials and facilities, but also about the all situations in the state relevant to safer implementation. Is of the 2000 more or less this time, and go further what is CSA and additional protocol, and take advantage of new techniques and more information like remote monitoring, environmental sampling, satellite imagery, etc. Today, 133 states are recognized with a state level approach according to this year 2020, excuse me. And there is another important concept that is integrated safeguard. It's an optimal combination of all the tools that IAEA has, and the CSA an additional protocol, and has once the agency has verified no diversion of nuclear material and no undeclared facility or activity, the agency, that is very important, can draw, and this is the glossary, can draw a broader conclusion that all nuclear material in a state remain in peaceful activities. And what does it mean in practical terms? It means that IAEA reduced the frequency and intensity of verification activity at the declared facilities. Today, or at the end of 2020, 76 states has integrated safeguard according to the CIR. Let's see the situation in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a table here. We have several countries. All the countries are signatories and has enforced NPT and Tlatelolco Treaty. But the situation concerning safeguard is quite different. All countries has CSAs in different ways. There are countries with CSA and additional protocol, and in particular, we have 5 countries, Chile, Colombia, Cuba, Jamaica, Peru, and Uruguay, with what we say is integrate safeguard. There are 19 countries out of 33 with CIR, with a state level approach as per 2020 CIR. We have 3 countries without additional protocol. They are Argentina, Brazil, and Venezuela. It's important the situation in Argentina and Brazil because they have profuse nuclear activities. Not this is the case of Venezuela. And so you can, I leave you this table to see how the situation is. And let's go quickly to ABACC and the neutral verification system. As you know, Brazil and Argentina has a very advanced nuclear development. It includes power reactors, research reactors, sensitive technologies as enrichment, reprocessing in the past. Both countries are developers of nuclear technology. Argentina is an international supplier of research reactors. And the system is unique because it has searched of an original bottom-up idea. A bottom-up idea in the sense that it was a decision, the design was a decision of states, and then was approved in any way or endorsed by the international community. It has been a driver to switch nuclear rivalry into cooperation, and has been the enabler for both states to fully access the Tlatelolco Treaty and to become parties of the NPT. It is based on an innovative neighbor-to-neighbor control model, because inspectors from Argentina goes and inspect materials and facility in Brazil and vice versa. Here we have like a timeline with some milestone about the rivalry from cooperation between both countries. The most important thing is the passage from military government to civil government in both countries, and the reapproachment in 1985, then the Mercosur through the Asunción Treaty in 1991, and the most important, the bilateral nuclear agreement, called also the Guadalajara Agreement, and the creation of ABACC. More steps, further step was that at the same time, in 1991, the bilateral agreement enters into force, and is signed the quadripartite agreement among Argentina, Brazil, ABACC, and IAEA. That is what is applied today. Then there are several other milestones, the full implementation of the Tlatelolco Treaty. In March of 1994, the quadripartite agreement enters into force. So there is the system as we know today dates from March 1994. Then the Argentina and Brazil became states parties of NPT in 1995 and 1998. And then there is another milestone important, that is, as both countries have signed the additional protocol, there is what is called like a waiver, is the 2011, where Nuclear Supplies Group authorized enrichment and reprocessing sport only if the recipient has CSA and additional protocol, or pending this, recognize the situation, the special situation of the verification through the quadripartite agreement and ABACC. So like some kind of parallel to the CSA plus additional protocol. So the bilateral agreement creates ABACC, creates the common system of accounting and control, that is the basis of all the safeguard system. And of course, all nuclear materials and activities must be under that system of accounting and control. The role of ABACC is an independent binational agency for verification that monitors the accomplishment of states' commitment. So with the quadripartite, all of this integrates, can appoint inspectors, may perform inspection, but in case of failure, the agency can denunciate but has no mandate to apply sanctions to operators. Should notify and request normalization and eventually notify the situation to the Secretary General of United Nations and the Secretary of OAS. The quadripartite is what we have today, satisfies the obligation of states under Tlatelolco and NPT. And there is like a statement of avoiding necessary duplication of safeguard activities between ABACC and the agency, but in practice, both agencies must keep independent conclusions. ABACC must cooperate to ensure IAEA reaches its verification goals, but the inspections are independent. And IAEA must use ABACC technical capability when possible. But it's like a kind of noise has been always that the inspection should be separated between both agencies and the independent conclusions has been seen for many times like some kind of not enough confidence from IAEA to ABACC. Cooperation, well, here what I told before about ABACC and IAEA. This is the structure of ABACC today. You have professionals, Brazilian professionals inspecting Argentine facilities and material, and Argentine professionals inspecting Brazilian materials and facilities. There are a commission that is a political body, and you have a secretariat that is technical body. You can see here that combines technical and political roles. This year, ABACC makes its third anniversary of successful verification between both countries. Today is 77 installation of Argentina and Brazil and their safeguards, you can see the breakdown of such installations that contains, of course, the nuclear materials. And the inspections in 2019, 105 inspection of different facilities. And the accomplishments has been many, growing for a driver to grow bilateral cooperation, increasing of confidence building, pave the way to the ratification of instruments, and really has been successful the bottom-up approach, different from top-down approach in which decisions are encouraged by third-party states or third parties. And has been perceived as a model with potential application in other regions, but this is something to study. We have at the NPSGlobal studied that specific point. Here, a brief comment about if really ABACC replacement of the additional protocol. Neither Argentina and Brazil have signed, but they are the only members of the nuclear suppliers group in such situation. The waiver, as I told you, says pending this, the signature of additional protocol. The interpretation of the NSG waiver has been different in both countries in terms of permanency. Brazil has taken it as permanent. Argentina has been a debate about that, but the case is that there is something on the table still today. NSG have often stated that while pursuing the same purpose, the protection mechanisms are not the same, they are different. Additional protocol from verification through ABACC. In Brazil, in this, even though the nuclear policies has been tuned between both countries, Brazil has been more firm, even in his liminal documents about not to sign or not to endorse any further restriction derived from NPT if nuclear weapon states do not show progress on their own disarmament. This has been stated in the Brazilian National Defense Strategy that points out nuclear activities as keys for the Brazilian defense strategy. So the situation today is a further debate is required on the issue. It depends of the political situation, the political leadership in both countries. We and others as NGO, we have been trying to push the debate on this, but it's not, it's an unfinished business, a very good debate, a close conclusion about this point. And concerning if ABACC is inspiration for other conflicted regions, we have studied that. I will give the reference. We design a multidimensional matrix to analyze it, and our conclusion is not so easy because we never, between Argentina and Brazil, had a real ancestral, long-time conflict, but only a kind of rivalry pushed by any or other government, and it's not sometimes has been proposed as a potential model for Middle East or the conflict between India and Pakistan, and our conclusion is that is not so easy. This is the matrix. If you see our paper, you can see with detail, because it establishes some kind of methodology. Well, the path of future improvement of ABACC, many alternatives have been studied, and the point is ABACC prove his reliability and sustainability. one point could be that is a long-standing aspiration of both countries, officials and leadership, some kind of improvement in cooperation between ABACC and IAEA through an increase in delegation. Could be, for example, the traditional safeguard in charge of ABACC and state-level approach in charge of IAEA. That is just a proposal, nothing else. Another point that could be improved ABACC is regional expansion, covering more countries and not exclusively Argentina and Brazil. And many have studied the addition of roles, nuclear safety, security, nuclear disarmament verification. All this is under study, but the case is that for any change in ABACC is necessary a strong political, a joint political will between both countries. And of course, potential change would require research and modification of the current legal framework. And that's it. My final thought is we are a region with a strong vocation of peace. We have been pioneers in the development of international instruments like the local treaty, like ABACC. However, we should not rest on our achievement. On the contrary, and it's a good message for you as diplomats, we should go on working to improve them, to disseminate them to good practices and to create new instruments for peace and for security. I think that is our real challenge in these difficult times, not only because COVID, but the geopolitical situation and the global conflicts that we have in the world today. This is like a brief bibliography. We have some primary bibliography and our work concerning the points we have addressed in this presentation. Thank you very much.
So today we'll cover a little bit of the history of safeguards, how they came about. And what I want you to understand, what I want everybody to understand, some of you already do, I'm sure, that there are a number of safeguards regimes that depend on the status of the individual state, individual country. Keep in mind, however, that safeguards is really a system of accounting and control to ensure that certain types of material are not diverted out of peaceful use. They can be used for military uses. They just can't be used for nuclear weapons. And we'll talk about that as we go along. But it is not security. Safeguards is not designed to go in and inspect a facility and say, well, you don't have enough gates, you don't have enough guards, your material is not secure. What safeguards cares about is the material that you say you have and that we know you have is in the right places and it is not being used inappropriately. So, and that's a good thing to do. I mean, maybe that sounds like it's limiting, but it's really an important thing to do. So, the IAEA itself, the IAEA is an independent international organization. It is not a subset of the UN. It has its own director general. In a lot of ways, it acts like it's a subset of the UN, but it's not. It's not like UNIDO or some of the other organizations that you might be familiar with. I'm sorry, this slide is out of date. It should. I must have picked up my old presentation. The Director General is not Dr. Amano anymore. It's Rafael Grossi. The Director General reports directly to the UN Security Council. And that is the reporting and the structure. But he is the Director General of a separate organization. The IAEA itself is structured at the top of the pyramid. You have the Director General. He has a deputy, and then you have across the board, you have departments who are set up with heads. They have deputy director generals. The major departments are safeguards, safety and security, technical cooperation. There's also human resources and one or two others that are not, not as important. Safeguards is the big giant, and technical cooperation as well. We'll be talking about safeguards, but I want to, some of you may have some experience with technical cooperation. Under the NPT, we're skipping ahead a bit, under the NPT, there's kind of this trade-off. The non-nuclear weapon states are supposed to give up the pursuit of nuclear weapons. And on the other hand, they're supposed to receive information to allow them to use nuclear energy in a peaceful and secure manner. That's done by the second part of the quid pro quo. That is done through technical cooperation. They provide courses, they provide training, they provide equipment to the various countries. I can't see all of you on the screen, but show of hands, how many of you have dealt with technical cooperation? Any of you? Not seeing anything right now. So one of the things about technical cooperation and the agency in general is, and this is something that it goes across the board, and by that I mean it's all throughout the agency. The IAEA has a very limited budget. It does not have a huge budget. So if you want things from technical cooperation, or you want things from nuclear security, most people don't want to get any more safeguards than they have to have, but let's say you wanted some attention from safeguards, you have to go and ask. How do you ask? You ask through your country's representative to the IAEA, and most countries do that through their embassy in Vienna. Some countries don't have an embassy in Vienna. They work remotely a little bit, but the point is, you have to get their attention. You have to get them to do what you want them to do. We have a saying in English in the United States: the squeaky wheel gets the grease. This goes from the old days of wagons when you had to grease the wagon wheels, and the one that made noise got taken care of. That's true at the IAEA. If you make noise, the odds of you getting what you want are much better. So anyway, let's continue. That's enough about that. Under the departments are different divisions. For example, in the when I was at the IAEA, we were the Office of Nuclear Security. They had a restructuring and we became a division of the Department of Safeguards and Security. Okay, so at the end of World War II, of course, 2 nuclear weapons have been dropped, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The United States is the only nuclear power. The United Nations was formed, and it arguably replaced the old League of Nations. The League of Nations hadn't worked very well. It hadn't been able to stop much in the way of international wars. One of the primary things that was a problem with the League of Nations is the United States didn't participate. Even though President Wilson, if you go to Geneva, you'll see Wilson Boulevard and a lot of things dedicated to US President Wilson. He could not handle the US Senate, and they would not approve the US entry into the League of Nations. So the United Nations is formed. It's actually formed in San Francisco. It's formed during the war, right at the end of the war. And one of the big things that they're concerned about is, how do we control this new weapon? How do we control nuclear power, nuclear weapons? And what they created was the United States the United Nations Atomic Energy Commission, the UNAEC. Anybody ever heard of that? That's because it no longer exists. It was a failure. It was founded in January 1946 by the first resolution of the UN General Assembly. So that, it's right up in the front of their heads, or their minds. They're thinking about this nuclear stuff. We got to get something to do with that. We'll make the UNAEC. And it was a lot like the UN Security Council. was the major allies of the Second World War, and it couldn't deal with the problem. They could never get agreement. And because they had the ability to veto things, nothing ever got done. The Soviet Union stalled everything. They were working as hard as they could to get their own nuclear weapon. They didn't want to agree to anything. It was disbanded actually in 1952, but really didn't do anything after July of 1949. The Soviets tested 1 month later. The terms of reference, when you set up an organization, you always have to have terms of reference that says what the organization is going to do, what they're going to talk about, what they're going to work on. First reference to safeguards. And this is actually, it's a little fuzzy, but this is actually from the first terms of reference under that first resolution of the UN. So first of all, they wanted to exchange information for peaceful uses. They wanted to control atomic energy to ensure that it's only used for peaceful purposes. They wanted to eliminate weapons, nuclear weapons. So, the same thing that's been going on comes up in the ban treaty of a couple of years ago. But look at item D. For effective safeguards by way of inspection and other means to protect complying states against the hazards of violations and evasions. So right at the beginning, they have this idea that we should be able to safeguard the material. Okay. So, during the time of the UNAEC, the US studied what to do about this. And we had US made a proposal, proposed what was called the Baruch Plan. Bernard Baruch was a very prominent financial consultant to both Franklin Roosevelt and to President Truman. The study was actually done by Dean Acheson and Lilienthal. Acheson was later Secretary of State in the second Truman administration. And the plan was that the US would destroy its nuclear weapons if there were veto-proof UN controls that would ensure peaceful use only. Plan went through the UNAEC, but was blocked by the Soviet Union in the Security Council. Everybody knows, right, that any of the major members, the 5 major members of the Security Council, can block anything, can veto it, right? What's the only time that the Soviet Union failed to do that when it was important to them? Anybody know an example? Just unmute. Well, when North Korea invaded South Korea, the UN Security Council had an emergency meeting. And the Soviet ambassador got so angry that he stormed out of the meeting. And when he left, everybody else said, well, he's gone. And so they voted to support South Korea. So during what we call the Korean War, you'll find that there are troops from a lot of different countries, Turkey, Australia, various groups, only because the Soviet ambassador got furious and walked out. They never made that mistake again. So what happens, we've had this UN Atomic Energy Commission. Now we have the IAEA and the NPT. Well, starting right after the Second World War, began the Cold War. You have Churchill making his famous speech, I think in 46 or 48, about the Iron Curtain descending across Europe. United Kingdom goes nuclear. They're the 3rd nuclear state. Of course, you have the US, you have the Soviet Union in 49, UK in 52. You have Eisenhower and the Atoms for Peace plan, his presentation, the idea that we should do the peaceful sharing. The IAEA gets created in 1957. Officially, it starts in 57. Actually, it's goes on for a couple of years before that, getting things together, getting agreements. France goes nuclear in 1960, China in 64. The NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty itself, was under development for about 3 years, and it goes into effect in 1970. So, key features. The IAEA, it's arguably a replacement for the UNAEC. That's why it's separate and off to the side, because they didn't want to repeat what had not worked. The statute of the IAEA, and I advise you, it's a little short pamphlet or booklet. It's well worth reading. Doesn't take very long to read. Article 3 authorized the establishment of safeguards. And what you're going to find, we'll talk about this in a minute, is there are pre-NPT safeguards. Safeguards started before the NPT. Most of our safeguards are as a result of the NPT. And we even have safeguards for countries that are not members of the NPT. I don't know whether you've had a presentation on the NPT yet. I'm sorry, I can't remember have you had one already on the NPT? Yeah, okay. So you know that India, Pakistan, Israel are not part of the NPT, but they have safeguards. Some of them are pre-NPT safeguards. Others are, in the case of India, safeguards that have come about as a result of agreements. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But so NPT, the agency is set up to supply safeguards originally from its beginning or at the request of a state. Okay, Article 12 sets up safeguards program and a staff of inspectors. Now, if you go back and you look at old historic pictures, some of you, I'm sure, have been to the IAEA in Vienna, out at the Vienna International Center. If you were to have gone there 50 years ago, it would have been an old hotel, well, not old hotel, hotel down on the ring where they first started out, a building on the ring. It was kind of neat. I mean, it was, now they're a little bit isolated outside town, but not that much. So the way the IAEA does business is it uses information circulars, or IMCIRCs. The other documents that you'll see from the IAEA are what are called GovInf documents. GovInf stands for Board of Governors documents. The Board of Governors is the group that actually runs the IAEA. The Secretariat does not make policy decisions. The Secretariat being the 4,000 or 5,000 actual workers who do the work of the IAEA. They don't make policy decisions. Policy decisions are made by the Board of Governors and the members at the General Assembly. Every September, so we're a few months away from September, every September there's a meeting of the General Assembly. This is all the member states come together in Vienna. There's a Board of Governors meeting that goes on before the General Assembly. There are about 4 Board of Governors meetings every year, once a quarter, regular meetings where just the Board of Governors meets. There can also be emergency meetings of the Board of Governors in case something happens that requires them, or they feel requires them to get together. So this is the way things are done. And IMCIRC 26, which came out in 1961, established, remember this is 9 years before the NPT, established safeguards at research test and power reactors, which were less than 100 megawatts thermal. In those days, there weren't very many reactors that were more than 100 megawatts thermal. Today, a rule of thumb for nuclear reactors, for power reactors, they're typically not rated by their thermal capacity, they're typically rated by their electrical capacity. So if you have a relatively good sized modern plant, would be 1,000 megawatts electrical. A rule of thumb is about, you multiply by about 3 to get the thermal capacity. So a current plant is about 3,000 megawatts thermal per unit. Now, other types of reactors, research reactors, naval propulsion reactors, they're not rated by their electrical output because that's not what their purpose is. So they're rated by their thermal output. And so a research reactor, you would say you have a 10 megawatt, or you have a 5 megawatt, or you have a 100 megawatt thermal reactor. Gives you an idea how powerful they are. So you have MCIRC 26 and MCIRC 66, both establishing pre-NPT safeguards. So in Israel, Pakistan, and India, you have these types of safeguards that pre-exist, and they still exist. So those facilities are still under safeguards, but it's under the pre-NPT safeguards. Now, we've talked a lot about this. Pre-NPT safeguards rely on the states to declare the facilities. That's true also starting out with the NPT safeguards. But it's a system where safeguards verifies what the state says. It is not a system where safeguards goes in, inspects everything in the state and says, here's what's here. It works by declarations from the states. So you have to trust the states. You have to establish the initial inventory. And then you track the inventory. You track additions, subtractions. It's like bookkeeping. This is a state safeguards and accounting system. Okay. So along comes the NPT. And what the NPT requires is it requires the non-nuclear weapon states, as defined by the NPT, to accept safeguards on all nuclear material. What's nuclear material? You have to read every agreement to understand what nuclear material is, because there's some subtle variations that go on. But basically, nuclear material is the stuff that you can make usefully make a nuclear weapon out of. Plutonium, uranium, various kinds. Highly enriched uranium, uranium-233, plutonium in almost all its forms except for that which is over 80% plutonium-238. So MCIRC 153 sets out what states have to do under the NPT to come to an agreement with the IAEA. And each state has a separate agreement with the IAEA. There's not a one-size-fits-all agreement. Basically, there's an outline of what has to be in the agreement, but each agreement is individual. This is referred to as comprehensive safeguards. So when you see the term comprehensive safeguards, you're talking about MCIRC 153 safeguards. And that's what all states have to have that are non-nuclear weapon states. Later, we'll talk about the model protocol, the additional protocol, and how that adds on. But what can happen now, at the bottom here, we talk about the nuclear suppliers group. This is a group, a voluntary group that supplies the major countries that supply nuclear technology. They have an agreement among themselves, but again, it's voluntary, that they will not supply equipment unless that equipment goes into a safeguarded facility. So for example, under the US 123 agreement with India, all those facilities, India now had to go that they wanted to use equipment and materials supplied by the US. They had to go to the IAEA and say, here's the facilities. We'll come to an agreement about safeguarding those. The Board of Governors had to approve it. So you have, these are not MCIRC 26 or 66 agreements. These are later agreements that come about because of a treaty agreement with the United States. And that can happen in any of the non-NPT states. Okay. One thing you need to understand is the definition of source and special fissionable material. This is in Article 20 of the IAEA statute. You just need to read it carefully to understand what's there. MCIRC 153 establishes the state system of accounting and control. This is the actual procedure for that state. This is how they do the bookkeeping, how they report movement between points, how they set up areas within facilities, what the facilities are, etc. A lot of confusion sometimes about IMCIRC 153 and what it actually allows, particularly in terms of spot inspections or short time inspections. There are a lot of provisions in IMCIRC 153 which were not normally used or are not normally used, but there are provisions there which do have some of the abilities that later are spelled out in more detail in the additional protocol. But the procedure in 153 is every state under 153 made a declaration as to what it has. And again, the IAEA safeguards inspectors then go in and verify those declarations. That starts the state system of accounting and control, and then it proceeds from there. So there are additions, there are subtractions, and everything gets tracked based on the initial declarations. Well, this went along. NPT went into effect in 70. It took a while. Now, this took years for the declarations to come in, for the verifications to be done. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But it was a working system. Safeguards also has ties to export controls. Export controls, the Nuclear Suppliers Group is probably the major one. The Zanger Committee, Zanger was I believe, Swiss diplomat. This comes up with a list every year of what materials are dual use, what materials should be under control. Both are tied into safeguards, not directly, but they have this sense that the tie, like I explained with India, you may have to accept safeguards even if you're not an NPT state. The US 123 agreements, there are some in South America. Some countries in South America have 123 agreements. They're called 123 agreements because they come up under section 123, section 123 of the US Atomic Energy Act, which requires the US to structure agreements when we transfer material and to get those agreements approved. The administration, the Biden administration, the Trump administration, any president's administration can't just do that on their own without any review. So let's go back to this term. There's a term that comes up in safeguards, which if you understand this term, it can help you quite a bit. It's called a significant quantity, or an SQ. It's defined for different materials, uranium-233, 235, and plutonium. What the IAEA says is if you have this amount, and it's expressed in kilograms under different conditions, if you have this amount, we assume you have a weapons program. The confusion is that a lot of people think that an SQ is the minimum amount of material that's needed to build a nuclear weapon. It's not. The SQ for plutonium is 8 kilograms. Department of Energy, US Department of Energy, has made open statements saying that you could build a nuclear weapon with 4 kilograms of plutonium. But the SQ is very important from a political context. The way safeguards are established at a facility is so that they are inspected, the facility is inspected often enough that they could detect the diversion of an SQ between inspections. So let's say the facility could produce an SQ in a year. We'd have to inspect that facility at least every year in order to detect the diversion of an SQ. If we cut the SQ down by a factor of 2, we have to do twice as many inspections. And because the IAEA is limited in funds and limited in inspections, if they had the number of inspectors they'd love to have and the funding they'd love to have, they might be much more agreeable to decreasing the SQ. A rule of thumb is the SQ for plutonium is 8 kilograms. The SQ for highly enriched uranium is 25 kilograms. Highly enriched uranium doesn't work as well in bombs as plutonium is. That's why there's a difference in the mass. But this is an important concept to understand, both from a technical point of view as to what it is, not being the minimum to make a weapon, and as to the political impact that it has. So we're going to go through this. We're doing all right, but want to get going. I've mentioned this several times about safeguards being more an accounting system. Safeguards is designed to detect diversion. It is not designed to prevent diversion. If we wanted to prevent diversion, then safeguards would be guns, guards, and gates, and it's not. Safeguards is, where is it? Is it under control? Is it in the right places? But if it does have a deterrent effect, it's just like, you know, if you are driving down the road and you know that there's a highway patrolman or a policeman who has a radar gun, and you know that he's hidden on the road, you're probably not going to speed because you don't want to get a speeding ticket. But that doesn't prevent you from speeding. You can speed if you want. You're just taking the risk. And that's the same way safeguards works. There's deterrence of people avoiding safeguards because safeguards exist, but it can't prohibit people from doing things. Most states that are member states of the NPT now have small quantities protocols because they don't have a lot of material. This allows states that have only a little bit of material, we're talking a kilogram, a couple of kilograms of material, to do a very simplified form of safeguards. Their reporting is very simplified. Their inspections are very minimal. They still need to have an accounting system, and they need to make an annual report. But basically, the IAEA takes the position that, you know, if they don't have much, why should they have to do much in terms of safeguarding it? The risk from small amounts of material is very low. Okay, so we have 153 safeguards, IMCIRC 153 safeguards. All of a sudden, we have all these things that erupt. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, South Africa, and North Korea, all problems with safeguards under 153. All these countries, North Korea dropped out of the NPT. There's some question about that, but that's more technical questions of diplomacy. But all these were member states, but they all had nuclear weapons programs. So what was developed was IMCIRC 540, the Model Additional Protocol. This allows for a big expansion, but it's voluntary. This is not required under the NPT. States volunteered to accept the Model Additional Protocol, with the exception of Iran, which has been forced by the UN Security Council to accept the Model Additional Protocol. It changes the focus from facilities to the state overall. In other words, now the IAEA is looking more like an intelligence gathering operation. They're using commercial satellite photography. They're using open source research. They're looking at the state of as a whole to detect whether there might be violations of safeguards. Environmental sampling, a big thing that comes up under the Model Additional Protocol. The ability to put environmental sampling in place to see if there's leakage from anything that might disclose an undeclared facility. And this got into a lot of problems about 5 years ago with the Board of Governors. The Russian Federation said, oh, wait a minute, this is something new. It really wasn't. They raised a lot of concern, not well placed. Okay, how are safeguards implemented? You've been talking about some of that. Prior presentation talked about some of that. There are inspectors. The inspectors do things like seal things. They have their own detection equipment. They come out, they look at stuff. The inspectors come from all different countries. They're trained by the IAEA. For the most part, they try not to interfere with the operation. Their monitoring is passive. They do very little active monitoring. Passive monitoring might be using a gamma ray or a neutron detection system, detecting what comes out from spent fuel, things like that. More and more use of real-time monitoring. In other words, cameras and detectors that are electronically linked to Vienna and give real-time reports and video feeds, for example, of what's going on in a facility. And then again, what we talked about, the intelligence-like activities. Okay, what do safeguards do for non-proliferation? Well, doesn't prevent it. Didn't prevent it in the case of North Korea, hasn't prevented it in the case of a couple other countries, but it raises awareness. And for the most part, it's a very important contribution to non-proliferation. There are what are called loopholes to the system. Some of them are really not loopholes. For example, when the NPT was drafted, the major powers had nuclear-powered ships. So there's an exception for military uses, which are not weapons uses. Can be used for military satellites, can be used for military propulsion systems. You could probably come up with other things. But it's really not a loophole, but that's a lot of people call it a loophole. Doesn't account for non-state actors. In other words, what happens in a country when you have non-state actors? That's a question of diplomacy. And it doesn't cover all weapons material. If you do the research, you'll find that there are probably 20 different types of material which you could actually use to make a nuclear weapon, most of which are totally impractical. In other words, just because a material can be used doesn't mean, you might have 1/100th of what you need in the world's overall supply. But there are two that are really problematic, and there's a lot of this material around. One is Neptunium-237. The other is Americium-241. Americium-241 is used in smoke detectors, but these are treated, they're not part of Article 20 of the IAEA, but they're treated as a special exemption. And right now, no one other than the nuclear weapon states has these materials in any kind of quantity. So it's not been a problem up to this point. Safeguards isn't safety and it isn't security. It is really, really the accounting and control mechanism. Safeguards is mandatory. Safeguards and security are not. There's only one little catch in the safety. If a state does not conform to IAEA safeguards guidance, safety guidance, the agency can refuse to provide technical cooperation assistance. That can be, that's in the books, that can be done that way. For the most part, that's not the way the agency operates. What the agency will say is, we perceive that you're not meeting these safety criteria. Let's work with you and get you to the point where you are, and we'll provide the technical cooperation assistance. The IAEA is not an international regulator. It is an international organization to assist states in these various operations by providing guidance and technical support, and under the NPT, providing safeguards. Last point here, safeguards has its own classification system, and information that's within safeguards stays within safeguards. I was in nuclear security. We had a kind of a special relationship with safeguards because we had started out in safeguards. But for the most part, no one got safeguards information. People in technical cooperation don't get safeguards information. They can't walk into the safeguards part of the agency and say, tell me about this, or what about what's going on in Argentina this week. Doesn't work that way. Everything in safeguards stays in safeguards. Okay, a couple of things. Big point, safeguards doesn't deal with anything other than nuclear material. Doesn't deal with other radioactive material. If there are big cobalt-60 sources or big medical treatment sources or big food irradiation systems, not a part of safeguards at all. That's a part of security and safety. The agency does have a code of conduct for radioactive sources, but that's for SEAL sources only, and it doesn't deal with a lot of issues. So if you're interested in that, you can follow on with that. Okay, running out of time here. This is the IAEA categorization table. You'll, if you're not familiar with this, you should become. This comes from IAEA publication. Category 1 are the most dangerous. These are for other radioactive materials, not for nuclear materials. If you're talking about nuclear materials, the categorization comes from IMCIRC 225, or the same table is basically the same table as in the CPPNM, the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. There it's the material type, what form it's in, and there are 3 Roman numeral categories. And then look at a footnote, which footnote C says, what do you do with things that are not that less than the quantities in category 3. Okay, final thing, JCPOA. When the JCPOA came out, we had the director of training at the IAEA at a presentation, and Jean-Marie said, was asked about it, and he said, well, I don't know what the JCPOA is, but it's not safeguards, because it's now dealing with a lot of things that are inspection of things that are not classically safeguards. For example, the IAEA is inspecting centrifuges, not something that they did before in terms of looking at the technology of centrifuges. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Do have a few minutes left. Sean, I'm sorry I ran a little bit long. And again, I apologize for not starting this presentation out, but any questions?
Hello. I actually have a couple of questions, but I think maybe Irma could better answer them. But or whether George wants to answer it, I think it would also be okay. So they're related both to additional protocol and how they are both like implemented and conceptually. So one specific question that was for Irma is, I understand that the ABACC in a way is being kind of, how do I say, serving instead of having the additional protocol for Argentina and Brazil. But I was wondering if there's any specific system in place within ABACC that allows for the kind of inspections that additional protocol allows. Meaning if there's any system that will give like the additional access, or this kind of things that would go beyond the inspections that happen normally within the comprehensive safeguard agreement. That's the most specific one for Irma. The other question is on how the additional protocol relates to the NPT. I have recently heard some people say that if you look at the text of the NPT, it talks about applying the system, the safeguard systems of IAEA or something like this. And there are some that consider that the IAEA system of safeguards includes additional protocol, that it is not only limited to the comprehensive safeguard agreement. So I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about this, like if you look at the numbers in general, yes, most countries have applied additional protocol, but not all. So it's obvious that not everyone believes that that it's a requirement from the NPT. But I just wanted to hear a little bit more about this. Thank you.
Irma, let me just address the second point first. The IAEA's position is that it is not required, that it is voluntary for the additional protocol. I'm sorry, Irma should address the rest of the questions.
Well, yes, as George says, it's voluntary, and it search additional protocol search because of the reality. The reality showed that was not enough to commit, that the states commit with exclusively declare all their materials and facilities and nuclear activities, but also that there were states that even having declared those declarations were not exactly true. So there were clandestine activities or diversion of materials. So additional protocol is an improvement proposed by the agency and accepted by the international community through the parties of to the agency to improve the verification of peaceful activities. That is, so is voluntary. There are several countries that resist to accept or to, because of many reasons. There are a lot of arguments. There has been, during my presentation, I'll tell you that it was very debated in Brazil and Argentina because I interest. There are many arguments, but and from time to time it comes to the table to be discussed again. But the point is that there is voluntary. There has been in the RevComs many attempts to make it mandatory, but of course there are many MPT parties that never would accept that an additional protocol would be mandatory. In general, reality is what states the pace for changes in the international documents, but nothing very big has happened to change the mindset of many states that reject the additional protocols. Concerning ABACC verification, no, ABACC verification is exactly what a comprehensive safer agreement asks for states, and not replaces in this sense the additional protocol. But what happened? On the other hand, as is a bilateral system, it has been a confidence building measure. What happens in reality is that both countries and the ABACC authorities knew very well what's going on in both countries. So it would be very difficult for the mutual verification system to disclose in any or discover in any moment that something clandestine could be happening, because everyone knows the others, and there is it's very difficult in the current system to perform clandestine activities given the level of mutual confidence between the both countries. Even so, the NSG waiver, as NSG state at that moment, is pending off the signature of agreement. But it happened in 2011, so we have 10 years of the waiver and nothing new will happen. And I anticipate that nothing new will happen in the next years, because the international community is focuses on other problematic situations that and Argentina and Brazil is not a problematic situation in this moment.
I see, Ricardo, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Moore and Professor Arguello for the presentations. I have a question specifically for Dr. Moore regarding the JCPOA. I don't know if you could elaborate a little bit more about what are the safeguards that are being applied and how these verifications are being carried out, especially if within these measures and the safeguards, the issues and the conflict sparking in Yemen has something to do with it, because it was used at some point as an argument for the JCPOA to be labeled as non-effective or ineffective, since there were traces of nuclear or missiles coming from Iran that were allegedly being used in Yemen. So I don't know if you could elaborate a little bit more. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't think I can elaborate to that depth, and particularly with the relation with Yemen. But the agency has been stretched to get into fields that they had not been in before. monitoring an enrichment plant. They do monitor enrichment plants, and under ABACC, the ABACC assistance, they monitor enrichment plants. And one of the things I did want to mention, just, the agency also has a similar agreement with Euratom to monitor European facilities, just like they do with ABACC. But the details, they are going in now. They're monitoring the inventory. There's been some brief periods of lack of cooperation, and I'm not sure exactly what the status is now. The Iranians have enriched more material. There's a lot of gamesmanship in this. They would like the sanctions removed. There's the ongoing talks in Vienna that have been going on for several months now about the US coming back into the JCPOA. I'll just say my personal belief was that the JCPOA was the best agreement the Obama administration could have gotten. And I think it was very bad that the Trump administration pulled out of it. May not be the best agreement in the world, but at least it was doing something. But I'm sorry, I can't go into, I don't know all the details of exactly what's going on, and it changes on a daily or monthly basis, and how it ties politically to other things that Iran is involved with. I mean, this is what everyone would have liked to have had, was to somehow couple the JCPOA with, curtailing Iranian involvement, prosecuting what we call terrorism, what other people might call something else in other countries. So Ricardo, I'm sorry, I'm not really answering your question, but the agency is doing what the agency can do. The DG is reporting to the Security Council on what his opinions are.